welcome to Healthy Talks. I am your host, Julie, and today are with Ana Waddington, who's the founding director of YourStance and also outreach nurse for Rough Sleeper. Hi, Anna, how are you today?
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to meet with us again. I know that I'm excited for this interview from our last chat, so let's dive straight into it. So, Anna, tell me, can you share with us your journey from working in A&E to becoming a pediatric nurse specializing in trauma care and adolescent health?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of a convoluted career, I guess. So I trained as a pediatric nurse here in London at
Mhm.
City University. My background actually it wasn't my first degree, so I did history and politics of the Middle East. And
Okay.
then I really realized, that I kind of wanted to do something more hands-on, and work with vulnerable groups. That has always been something that's like pushed me. And so I trained to do pediatric nursing with always an interest in adolescent health. And I started my career in a small district hospital here in London, really, really poor area of London with lots of disadvantaged groups. And it really just threw me into like the whole thrust of emergency care in pediatrics. And I very quickly realized that I wanted to go somewhere bigger that had trauma, because although it was really interesting and I learned a lot about different types of diseases and the impact of the disadvantages to health in pediatrics. I really wanted to see what I would do if we had any traumatic traumas such as road traffic accidents, and particularly was interested in stab wounds and gunshot wounds. And so I had to move to a major trauma center, because the London is broken up in 4 major trauma
Mhm.
centers, so there are 4 big hospitals, so there's only 4 places you can go. um so that's what I did, and I worked there for a few years, specializing in trauma and working in the A&E, both in adults and pediatrics, and just really felt this urge to specialize in adolescents. It's not really something that exists in medicine. It does for
Mm.
doctors, nurses as much. Like, if you want to be a specialist nurse, it's mostly around the chronic illnesses such as diabetes or respiratory for adolescents, but there's not really that much around trauma, which I found interesting because it was what I was seeing a lot of. I was seeing a lot of young people coming in with traumatic injuries as a result of interpersonal violence. And it was starting to become a really big topic here in London, where young people were dying from serious wounds caused for a variety of reasons, but mostly because of wounds and gunshot wounds. And I'm sure it's something that you see a lot in where you're from.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Is that what inspired you to create your own charity of your stance?
Yeah, so whilst I was in the A&E department, both in adults and pediatrics, like I said, I was seeing quite a lot of young people coming in with serious wounds. And the narrative was always the same. Their friends were either with them and ran away because they were really scared and the young person was left alone, or they were freaked out, didn't know what to do, and the young person died. And there was one incident in particular, which I think me and my old team will never forget, where it was a young person who didn't have the most serious wound, was brought in by the medical team, the ambulance team, and unfortunately he didn't survive from those wounds, and he should have survived had someone put pressure on a really simple technique. And we found out that his friends just really didn't know what to do, and that really inspired me to say, well, I've got the skill, I've
Mm.
got the and I really want to go out and meet young people who are in these situations or who may find themselves in these situations for whatever reasons, and train them, upskill them, make them feel valued members of society. And so I did that in 2018. I shopped around. I tried to ask different organizations to see if they had, this offer, or if I could go out. And I was too young, I was too old for some of the organizations. So I just went with 2 really wonderful colleagues who said, sure, I'll come with you. And we started off in a young offending prison, teaching them, and then just with young people kind of collaborating and developing a curriculum or a workshop that would
Yes.
suit them. Yeah. And so we started teaching bleed control, CPR, and basic life support, all from the perspective of someone becoming a zero responder. So before the first responders arrives, your ambulances, your police. And so it was really on using stuff that they had on them rather than focusing on like bleed control kits. And through there, over the last 5 years, it's gone from just me to a team of 6 of us to 350 medical is. Yeah. And where it's gone from being just in a young offending prison to in 17 out of the 32 boroughs in London, teaching in prisons, in young offending institutes, in alternative educational provisions, and on the streets with detachment teams. So what happens here in the UK is that we have something that's really it's a really interesting model in education where if you're bad or you do something naughty or you don't come to school, you get excluded from school and you get put into something called an alternative provision, which is you could be traveling 2 to 2.5 hours to get to.
Sure.
And they're dotted around London, and you'll be with other young people who are equally struggling. And we know that they can be a little bit of a breeding ground for exploitation because they're vulnerable. They're incredibly vulnerable young people. A lot of them will have other types of vulnerability, such as being neurodivergent or have speech and language needs, and it puts them even more at risk of being more vulnerable to violence. So we go to those sort of schools because we have the stats from the trauma centres. We know that a lot of young people do get injured outside of alternative provisions. And then on top of it, we know that young people will most likely be injured within 5-kilometre radius of their school. So, we're doing that and reaching those types of that group of young people to try and empower them and make them feel like they're cared and they're members of society and they're valued, and we want them to survive and we don't want them to see their friends die. So yeah.
And tell me, how do you approach empowering young people like that? Like you say, sometimes they have other difficulties like speech and learning, or they can have PTSD or just completely shy and don't know what to do. How do you approach them in your workshops at YourStance, like to show them how to pressure these wounds and how to treat it? How do you approach them?
Yeah, we've done a big piece of work with multiple different teams. So we worked with the mental health teams, South London, and a number of different organizations, the speech and language teams at the Royal London Hospital. And also we've practiced with like young advisor groups to try and build what we call now a psychologically informed approach. So we recognize that not everyone learns in the same way. So all of our volunteers are trained to manage different types of energy explosions in the workshop and recognizing vulnerabilities such as like any safeguarding concerns or how someone might be presenting as stressed by a situation or stressed by a content. Not everyone will say it. They might start rocking, or they might get up, or they might walk around the room, or they might say some verbal things that seem inappropriate to you and me, but that's their way of soothing themselves. So we train them on like what we call the stress monitor and how to ground a young person. So we start the workshop by doing grounding. So we get everyone in a room together, we get us into a circle, and we do a bit of a grounding exercise and an icebreaker. It's kind of the stuff that any gym teacher would have done. You just didn't realize that's what they were doing. And so you get everyone feeling comfortable, feeling safe. You set some ground rules as well. You do like an exercise that helps you relax. And then we separate into different stations so that young people aren't all together in a group. We separate them so they have almost like a 1-to-3 ratio with the doctor or nurse or paramedic, to allow them really to have that more intimate conversation with a professional about their experience. And none of it is like your traditional testing methods. So we do test like how they learn, but we do it in different ways. So we'll watch them, or we'll get them to teach us, once we've taught them the skill, just to make sure that they've got it.
Yes.
It's very, very hands-on as well, and we make it fun and interactive. And you assess whether a young person has had experience of them, their own experience. Our volunteers have become really good at listening to what the young people are saying, asking them before they do something. So we have like a big limb that bleeds, but a lot of the time we don't need to make it bleed. It's
Yes.
more like
Okay.
talking to them. Yeah, exactly. And getting them to think about it, and then checking in each time, like, is this okay? How you doing? Do you need a moment? In the prisons, because they can't leave, so we're an open room, we don't let anyone forcibly stay in if they don't feel comfortable. But obviously in a prison, they're not allowed to leave. So we have safe spots in the room where they can go and just like check out. And one of our volunteers is trained to sort of ground them and just check in on them, do a different exercise. If they don't want to do the workshop, we can just have a chat, play a game. We've got a ball, little things. And it's a very interactive thing. And then at the end, we bring them all back and we ground them again. And then sometimes we throw a ball around just to bring that energy back.
Enjoying this episode? Ever thought of starting your own podcast? Podup.com is your go-to. They've got everything you need to run a pro show, including 35 or more AI-powered tools for success. Sign up today for a free starter account and get 15% off with the code HealthETalks15. The code is HealthETalks15. Plus, check out podallies.com for a done-for-you podcasting experience, complete with website, social media, and editing. Start now and let's launch your podcast together.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'd really take off my hats. Like I said last time, take off my hat to people like you who actually go and take the time and spend time with youth and show them, because you never know what they've been through at such a young age. It must be extremely difficult to work with someone like that. And what are some of the key challenges that you have faced while managing young people admitted with injuries, especially in terms of their psychological impact and physical needs?
I think it's really interesting because when I started working in trauma, so after I worked in A&E, I went to work for the trauma service, and I was the person who was seeing all of the young people really who were admitted. I didn't just see young people, I saw pediatrics and adults, but my interest was obviously the adolescent group. And I think what set them aside from your children and from your adults is the lack of parents or a supportive adult. And you could really find yourself having to step up and advocate for them, because they would just usually agree to stuff. And then you'd see their faces, sort of glaze over. And a lot of the times, if you didn't advocate or explain to them what was going on properly, because I think as anyone, because they present like an adult and they can communicate like an adult, everyone assumes that their understanding is the same. And so, you can have like a really important trauma surgeon come up to them, say, blah, 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 blah. These are all the surgeries that you're going to have. That chest drain that you've got in, this is what this and then this. And they're like, okay, when can I go home? And everyone just assumes that they're fine. But actually, they don't understand what's going on at all. And that makes them more likely to want to abscond and just leave. So the issues that we faced was the lack of someone there to support them and be on their side, and also the high risk of absconding. So a lot of young people would just disappear, because it's not just the fact that it's really scary being on a ward and not really having anyone there, but it's also really boring.
Yeah.
And it's boring. And on top of that, you're in the middle of two age groups, essentially. Like the wards, if you're lucky, or should I say unlucky, it depends what kind of adolescent you are, you'll get put on a children's ward. If you're 16 and under, you'll be put on a children's ward. And if you're 16 and over, you'll be put on an adult ward. And you might be next to like a 90-year-old man who's had a fall, who's listening to Irish song on repeat. Exactly, it'll drive you insane. And I remember a young person once, we're really lucky at the hospital I work at. We've got violence reduction youth practitioners, who some of which have lived experience, some of them don't, but they're incredible at figuring out if a young person is safe to be discharged, given the context that's happened to them, especially if they've come in with a serious injury. So they only see those with serious injuries. They don't see every adolescent. And I remember once working with them, and this young girl who'd come in following an assault, a massive head injury. and she was on a pediatric ward. She was in between 2 beds with babies either side. And she just kept leaving the ward, and the nurses kept calling us, being like, I don't know what to do with her. She's really frustrating. She won't stay on the ward. She won't take her medication. She's not engaging. You know, like, there's only so much we can do for her. And I remember these caseworkers walked up to the ward and they were like, right, talk to me about what's going on to this girl. And she said, can't take the baby screaming. Like, it's just, it hurts my head. I've got a head injury. And, you know, no one had explained to her that she's going to be super sensitive. 1, because she's had a traumatic injury from an assault. And 2, because hit her head, you know. And so, yeah, so we got her headphones, noise cancelling headphones. And that just stopped the whole thing. And she managed to stay in her bed. And such simple measures to try and de-escalate that stress, right? Because you try sitting next to 2 screaming babies that are ill.
Oh, thank you.
Exactly. And, you know, similar in adult ward, I remember one kid was like, I don't want to stay here. It's really scary. Everyone dies.
Oh, shame.
I guess everyone was old. So, you know, and so those are the 2 things that you really had to try and be a bit innovative and like try and figure out what could you do to make it fun. And the kind of assessments that I do would be more getting them out of the ward and walking them around. Or, you know, it's almost a bit like doing a trauma therapy where you're doing movement trauma. Have you heard of EMDR?
No. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, EMDR is eye movement desensitization response. I can't remember where it was discovered, but it's mostly used for those who've been in combat, and they found it really, really effective. So it helps you process the trauma by doing movement. So you can tap, you can follow like a light with your eyes, you can like press something whilst you're reliving memory. It's really effective.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's really good. It's definitely something I've actually had to do it myself, to me, following a traumatic incident at work, actually. But I would recommend it to anyone who it is, you know, appropriate for. Obviously not appropriate to a young person who's just been injured, because you need time to process, and then you can do the therapy. But they do say movement is really good when you're having to talk about situations. It helps ground you.
Yes.
So exactly. So I used to try and implement that a little bit. Although I'm not a mental health nurse, I read a lot about mental health, and I tried to implement that with young people, like get them to do something, play a game, play pool, play cards, whilst I was doing my assessments, because they're not as freaked out then.
Yes, definitely. But that's for anyone. Like, I'm not sure if it will be relatable, but a few years ago, I struggled really bad with anxiety, and I had a panic attack, and someone literally came up to me and started showing me this video, a funny video on their phone. And they're like, come walk with me, walk up and down with me. And then it calmed me down, and I got back. I'm like, oh, okay, now I know next time to do something like that. So knowing the tapping and the moving of the eye and then pressing on something, that's a good thing to know for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense if you just think about the science behind it. Like, when you're walking, your body's almost focusing on the fact that you're having to walk rather than on the thought, because the thought is what's making you anxious, right? And so then it's like refocusing that anxiety away on how to walk, how to breathe, you know, all that kind of stuff. It does really work. And we use it in our workshops as well. You know, if a young person's really struggling, we sort of distract them away from the thing that is making them struggle and trying to get them to do a different activity. And that tends to help a lot.
That's amazing. And could you elaborate a little bit more on your experience working with London's A&E and how it influenced your approach to critical response in healthcare?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think, like anywhere in the world, A&E is a really busy place. And over the last, 6 years, we've had a lot of things happen in our world, including a pandemic. And I think the main lesson that I've taken away, my mum's an A&E nurse, and so is my aunt. And it's probably one of the reasons why I went into A&E, because it's all I knew about nursing was A&E. I didn't know that there were specialist nurse roles and all that kind of stuff, but the most is treat them as a person and not from their injury and not why they're there. And that's kind of influenced my practice throughout nursing the last almost 10 years now, is that always try and just see them as a person and just see that it's, you know, an iceberg of history that you don't know about that may be influencing the reaction that you're seeing in front of you, and just try to be the bigger person there and not let it be the thing that affects you and changes your opinion about them. And it's really influenced how I treat young people, I guess, you know, regardless of what they've come in with, regardless of what people are telling me they've done, it doesn't matter. The point is, I've got a child in front of me who deserves all the compassion and support and de-escalation and trauma approach as possible, because that might be the one time that they have a positive experience with a clinician, and that one time will influence their future, you know, attendance.
That's correct. That's exactly what you were saying in our last chat, saying like your response, your approach to them, and when you speak to them, that might be the first time they have that positive interaction. So you want to reinstate that, so in future, like when they are going through something, they have that courage to go up to a hospital or to a police officer, and it's because of your first interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we know that if a young person attends with a serious stab wound, like a serious stab wound that needs like going to theatre, multiple days of admission, barely surviving, they will have attended the emergency department 4 times before with maybe an anxiety attack first time, second time maybe a tiny little wound, third time maybe another stab wound, and then the 4th time is a big one. We know, we can predict that now. So what does that say about our interactions with those young people? We're not really getting it right. Do you see what I mean? We're not really knowingly picking up the signs early enough and providing those positive interactions. I'm not blaming anyone, by the way. It does give me a bit of food for thought, I suppose, on how we approach the environments we provide for young people. Because I don't want any young person to ever feel like a hospital is not a safe space, and it's not a place that they go to if they don't feel safe. I want them to feel safe in a hospital. And it really reminds me of this one time where we had a young person who attended our emergency department, and everyone was so frustrated with him because he just kept coming. And they were like, oh, booked in again. This is really frustrating. And he wouldn't really book in for anything. You know, he was sitting in our waiting room, and whenever anyone would be like, right, do you want an assessment? He didn't want one. And it's always stuck with me, because it wasn't until we did kind of forced him a little bit to have an assessment and got a real history and figured out he had like a huge amount of social issues. He didn't have anywhere safe to sleep. He didn't really have anyone to call like a safe adult. There was loads of stuff that we needed to do as clinical professionals that, you know, social services weren't really picking up. And he was asking for help.
Yes.
He was coming in, but he didn't really have the tools to do the next step. So it's almost like it's our job sometimes to pick up those little clues and to see, oh, young people just sometimes need us to guide them a little bit, not teach them. We're not here to teach them lessons.
Yes,
but just
guide them,
offer them that support. And if they don't want it then and there, that's fine. You haven't done a bad job, but maybe the next time they'll want it.
No, definitely. No, that's a huge lesson to take care of. Like, which 14, 15-year-old is going to tell you in you what they want? We have to pick up those clues. And tell me, what are some of the initiatives or programs that YourStance does? Like you said, you have the workshops in the hospitals, but are there anything else that we've been involved in to promote adolescent health and mental health awareness?
Yeah, so we don't teach in the hospitals. We teach in like different settings, so in prisons, in youth hubs, on the streets, in alternative provision. But we also do a few different types of workshops with young people. So we do the zero responder one, which I told you about, teaches bleed control, CPR, and basic. We also do one around like understanding your emotions and like why do I feel this way? And we bring in mental health nurses to help us do that with young people. The other ones that we do are in collaboration with a number of different organizations, one of which is the youth practitioners I was telling you about. They come in and they talk about their lived experience of having not the best relationships with friends and ending up being exploited and certain things happening. and using that as an opportunity to talk about positive relationships and the importance of having an adult there, because we know statistically that if a young person doesn't have a safe adult, it doesn't have to be a parent, it can be a teacher, it can be an uncle, it can be a brother that helps them throughout life, then they're more likely to end up in situations like violence or in prison, right?
Yes.
So it's talking about things like that and trying to empower them to know how to recognize these things and how to ask for help. We also deliver workshops for professionals. So we go and teach, we've kind of been doing a little bit of like going out to all of the football clubs and teaching all of the coaches, in London, because they have incredible initiatives with young people, and they sort of offer loads of programs for vulnerable groups of young people, disadvantaged groups, to try and give them something, an opportunity. And so it can mean that there are lots of different young people from different areas of London who are all interacting together, and they can have some incidences of violence outside of the club. So we've gone out there and we're training them all on what to do if someone's been stabbed. And it's been really interesting because we thought that their main worry was a stab wound, but actually what has come up a lot is that mostly people are worried about mental health and and a mental health crisis and self-harm. So we've had to sort of tailor it a little bit and train them on how to de-escalate like a young person who's in crisis, and get them out of a toilet cubicle, for example, which is a really common scenario. So it's been really interesting. And I guess the other thing we're doing is we're going around conferences, just trying to get the message out there really about, adolescence, and doing things like this, talking about it with yourself and to get people to be interested in it.
No, definitely. I'm definitely interested. If I was in London, I would be right there at one of your centers, like helping out. But what advice would you give to an aspiring nurse or anyone in a healthcare setting who's interested in specializing in trauma care and especially adolescent health?
I guess I would say one of the things that I would recommend is trying to hear about other people's jobs and listening to other people like talk, and just informing yourself in other people's roles. And one thing I think that is super powerful is just educating yourself. So I did courses on adolescents, and I just took advantage of free things. Like, Don't Forget the Bubbles is an amazing platform on the internet. It's free. You can read really incredible resources on there, and they have courses as well. They do conferences across the world. I can never afford to go to the conferences though. I'm like New Zealand and it's too far. But New Zealand, you can go.
Yes.
But it's just trying to really thrust yourself into those worlds. I don't know what it's like in South Africa or in America really, but I know that in the UK, nurses and doctors are sort of separated a little bit when it comes to education. And I've never really accepted that. So I sort of like elbow my way into conferences, and I'm always like the only nurse here, but I don't care. Now I don't care. It's taken me a few years to feel confident. But now, people know me and they're like, oh, nice to see you. And it's just because they really do have the best resources, and to say that, but it's just true. So just get yourself out there, like really get involved in research, and just take the opportunity to be part of the world of adolescence, because it's really exciting and there's lots of stuff to do.
No, definitely. And lastly, and I just want to know, looking ahead, what are some of your goals or areas of focus in continuing to improve healthcare for young people?
Personal goal would be, I would absolutely love to one day create a advanced clinical practitioner role for adolescents in trauma. I don't know if that's possible. So if anyone's out there help me create it, that'd be great. But it's one of the reasons why I'm doing rough sleeper nursing right now, is so that I can train myself on the things that happen if things go wrong, like really wrong,
Sure.
because we know that there's a huge percentage of young people who are homeless, and they're like hidden homeless, because they rough sleep on tubes, on trains, on couches. They don't really sleep on the streets. We don't see them. but it leads to loads of complications in life and breakdowns in families and likelihood of getting involved in violence or drugs and substance misuse. Or even if you're involved in violence, the chances of you becoming homeless are really high because people don't want you in their area, or you can't go to certain areas, you have no funding, all those kind of things. So I decided to do rough sleeping to just see what happens on the other side, so that I could have knowledge and bring it back to adolescents. But essentially, I guess it's trying to make a role that would be bespoke for adolescents, and just keep getting that message out there that if we get it right, we get it so right. And it really would have an impact on healthcare, a positive impact on healthcare if we got it right.
No, definitely. Well, Anna, thank you so much for your time today. I honestly think you are one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life. Like your dedication and passions for adolescents and helping them and seeing the actual true like genuinity from coming from you and to helping kids is just absolutely amazing. And keep up the good work, please.
Thank you so much. And do follow us on Instagram.
Yes, definitely.
And also, go to our website, message us. We're always interested to speak to people. And if you ever want us to come and chat about what we do or about adolescents, we're always happy to do that.
No, definitely. Thank you so much, Anna. Really appreciate it. And to all our listeners out there, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have. And we will put all the links to YourStance with this podcast. So keep a look out for that. And remember to like and subscribe.